France, we're interviewing Professor Hilary Charlesworth, Professor of International Law at the Australian National University. She's here in Geneva in the framework of a fellowship to study the UPR, and she's going to explain us what it is. So please, Professor, welcome first to our office in Geneva.
Thank you.
And thank you for agreeing to do this small interview. So please introduce us with your fellowship and then your interest in the UPR.
Okay. Well, I have a fellowship that is begun this year, given by the Australian Research Council, which funds research, academic research in Australia, to pursue a project called Rights, Regulation and Ritualism. And the fellowship allows me to devote some time to studying these general issues, and also gives me some PhD scholarships and postdoctoral fellowships, and if I can say, just while I have the floor here, that we welcome interest from scholars in this area from all over the world. So you can see our website and get in touch with us if you're interested in this issue.
Great, and explain to us more about the issue studying and what is ritualism.
So the name of the project, with its alliteration, Rights, Ritualism and Regulation, I think is the correct order. What I want to do is, the problem that the research really started up with was the problem that all international human rights lawyers face, which is the issue of implementation. So the idea is that at the international level, we have pretty good standards on human rights. The standard setting, they're not perfect and we could do better, but generally speaking we can say we've got pretty good standards with respect to human rights. The big issue, of course, is implementation, and we know this by just reading the newspaper every day. Countries accepting in theory treaty obligations and then doing very little about them. So really this work was inspired by the work of sociologists with whom I work at the Australian National University, particularly John Braithwaite and Valerie Braithwaite. They have done really interesting work on regulation of nursing homes. And I remember reading through a book of theirs, which is on nursing home regulation, and they make the point, they did a major 20-year study of nursing home regulation in the United States, in the United Kingdom and in Australia. And one of their findings was, in nursing homes there are many regulations, they're national regulations. And typically they found what nursing home operators do is when a new regulation comes about the temperature of the water for the baths, for the elderly people and so on, is that these nursing home operators accept the regulation, they don't protest against it, but then they use what the Braithwaites call ritualism to get around it. And ritualism, which in turn is drawn from the work of Merton, sort of a sociologist writing in the 50s and 60s, is one form of reaction to regulation. So when there's a regulation, you could defy it, you could say we don't accept that, or you could say we accept it and you can act on it. But one method of responding to regulation is to say, yes, thank you very much, we accept this regulation, and then devise means to get around it. So this is what the Braithwaites call regulatory ritualism. So it's accepting regulation in name and then working out techniques to actually, if you like, hollow out the obligation. So when I read the Braithwaites' book on nursing home regulation, because they are my colleagues, not because I know anything about nursing home regulation, I thought this is a really very interesting idea, and I thought it was very applicable to my own field of interest, which is international human rights law. And of course in the international human rights system we have people who defy regulation, who say, and one could think of countries which will come fairly readily to mind, which might say we don't want anything to do with that. For example, North Korea. So that's defiance. And we can also think of some countries, there are remarkably few of them, who might accept international human rights obligations and truly make a serious effort to implement them. But many countries, it seems to me, are in the position of engaging in ritualism. So you accept the human rights obligations for a variety of reasons, international pressure, national pressures, but then you work out ways to get around those obligations. So that's the project, if you like, very broadly described.
And you are trying to link that to the UPR. The UPR, I think this is interesting because it has a lot of countries being recommended to ratify and to implement ratifications and conventions. So how do you link both, and what were the reason of your stay in Geneva?
Well, I wanted to start with the UPR because it seems to me this is such an interesting experiment in the international human rights field. And of course, the idea of the UPR is responding to the sense, well, actually the international human rights system is very porous. There are many gaps, and countries, of course, some countries will follow up their obligations through treaty reporting, but some countries can get around that. But the UPR is such an interesting experiment because it's setting out universal periodic review. So this is really a major radical idea in the international human rights system. I guess I've been teaching international human rights law for over 20 years now, and in following this, I've never seen something so interesting, such an imaginative solution. So what I wanted to try and find out from visiting Geneva is how does the UPR work in practice? In theory, you could say the UPR is responding to forms of ritualism because it doesn't allow countries to sign on saying, yes, yes, we accept that new human rights rule, and then go away and forget about it. If, to use a term, it's holding countries' feet to the fire a little bit by promising this universal periodic review. But of course, as in all mechanisms of regulation, it's possible for even new and exciting ones to become ritualized in themselves. And one thing that I'm very interested in looking at the UPR is, first of all, how has it succeeded in bringing more pressure on countries to undermine ritualism, in a sense? How has it done that? And I think from speaking to expert observers such as you, I get the sense that it certainly has gone some way to prevent human rights ritualism. But of course, what's very interesting from an academic and other perspective is how has this new mechanism itself become ritualized? And I've only really had the chance to observe the UPR at quite a distance for a short period of time, but I'm particularly interested in the way that perhaps the weak spots in the UPR and how they might be strengthened.
Great. Well, I think this is a very fascinating study, and we'll be very looking forward to hearing what are your perception of the UPR. So whenever you along the way of your studies, if you publish anything on the UPR, we'll be interested in having your expertise from Australia on ritualism and the UPR. So thank you for taking time to explain us what it is, and we'll be looking forward to be in touch and hear from you. Thank you very much for your time.
That's a pleasure. And I also want to say that I think the UPR info is, especially for those of us who are scholars from so far away, it's an invaluable resource. So I'll be depending a lot on the fantastic database of UPR info here. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you.